Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Louise of Sweden and Eugenie de Montijo. Each navigated royal courts, personal sacrifices, and sweeping changes that reshaped European power and identity. Let us begin with the first, Louise of Sweden. Princess Louise of Sweden was born on the 31st of October in the year 1851, at the Stockholm Palace, in the heart of Sweden's royal capital. How did this quiet, thoughtful child grow into the queen of a foreign kingdom? What secrets lay behind her composed expression and steady devotion to duty? Was her legacy merely as a royal mother, or something far more influential, buried behind the silken curtains of palace life? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Louise Josephine Eugenie was the only surviving child of King Charles V of Sweden and Louise of the Netherlands. Though she was beloved, her early childhood was shaped by deep loss. Her younger brother, Prince Karl Oscar, died in infancy, leaving her an only child. With no male heirs, her father longed to see her succeed him on the throne, but Swedish law barred women from inheriting the crown. As her father struggled with political disappointment, Louise grew up in the royal palace, surrounded by privilege but not always by warmth. Still, she found comfort in her mother's gentleness and her father's bold affection, earning the nickname Sesson, while learning to navigate the demanding rituals of royal life. From the very start, Louise's royal childhood was marked by emotional fragility masked by ceremonial beauty. Her early years were filled with moments of joy, but they quickly gave way to sorrow. In the year 1854, when Louise was just 3 years old, her baby brother, Prince Karl Oscar, died from an illness. With his passing, she became the sole child of the Swedish royal household, an heir in love but not in law. Her mother, Queen Louise of the Netherlands, was never the same after that tragedy. A birth injury left her unable to have more children. Deeply religious and quietly melancholic, she offered her husband the option of divorce so he could remarry and have a male heir. He refused, but the emotional rift was undeniable. Louise remained the only child of a family meant to bear many. In this quiet isolation, young Louise formed a world of her own. She nicknamed herself Stockholm Street Urchin, a cheeky rebellion against the stiffness of court life. She danced at children's balls, hosted in her honor at the royal palace, yet always seemed to hover between affection and loneliness. Her father adored her, often painting her portrait himself in his private studio, while her mother provided a calm but distant presence. It was a world of titles and tiaras, but behind the golden walls, young Louise lived mostly without siblings, peers, or the promise of a crown. As Louise grew into adolescence, her place within the Swedish monarchy became both symbolic and uncertain. She was deeply cherished by her father, Charles V, who had become king in the year 1859 following the death of his own father, Oscar I. With no surviving sons, Charles looked to Louise not just with affection, but with ambition. He made several efforts to change the Swedish constitution so she could be named heir presumptive, a radical idea in a kingdom that had barred female succession since 1810. But the political winds were not in his favor. Despite his determination, Parliament refused to overturn the law. His brother Oscar had sons, and the existence of male heirs within the Bernadotte dynasty rendered reform unnecessary in the eyes of tradition. Still, Charles V never gave up on his daughter. In private, he called her Sesson, and publicly he displayed a father's fierce pride in her intellect, dignity, and spirit. Louise, in turn, inherited both the sensitivity of her mother and the dynamism of her father. Described by courtiers as unpretentious, lively, and at times mischievous, she often challenged the quiet solemnity of court life. She had a talent for provoking both delight and discomfort, especially among more conservative relatives. Her uncle Oscar, soon to be King Oscar II, found her too forward and too independent, even as others admired her courage. Yet beneath her boldness was a lonely young woman shaped by unfulfilled dreams, positioned as a royal daughter with no clear future in her native land. As Louise entered her teenage years, her royal status became a topic of international interest, not for succession, but for marriage. In the political world of 19th century Europe, royal daughters were often seen as instruments of diplomacy. For Louise, this meant becoming a central figure in talks between Sweden and Denmark, two neighboring kingdoms bound by geography yet divided by history. Despite shared Scandinavian roots, the relationship between Sweden, Norway, and Denmark was tense. After the Danish-Prussian War in 1864, resentment lingered over Sweden's failure to support Denmark. Yet by the late 1860s, both courts sought reconciliation, and Louise emerged as the symbolic answer. Talks began about marrying her to Denmark's crown Prince Frederik, the eldest son of King Christian IX and Queen Louise. The match seemed ideal on paper. Louise was intelligent, charming, and of royal blood. Frederik was heir to a powerful throne. But neither family embraced the proposal without hesitation. King Charles V questioned Christian IX's character, while Queen Louise of Denmark doubted that Princess Louise had the elegance or temperament fit for the Danish court. Whispers in Copenhagen even dismissed her as plain, a judgment Louise would silently defy in her own way. Still, diplomacy prevailed. The alliance offered Denmark an escape from further German influence and gave Sweden a path to healing fractured Scandinavian pride. But most surprising of all was Louise's own agency. Her father refused to force the marriage and left the final decision to her. The princess, barely 17, was about to step into a court far colder than the one she knew, but also into a destiny entirely her own. The future of Scandinavian diplomacy quietly unfolded in the summer of 1868 at the serene and secluded Backaskog Castle in southern Sweden. It was here, under the delicate veil of secrecy, that Crown Prince Frederik of Denmark arrived for what was officially termed a casual visit, but was in truth a royal courtship in disguise. The guest list was short, the mood was informal, and the purpose was clear: to see if young Louise and Frederik might truly suit one another. Louise was just 16, graceful but unpretentious, while Frederik was a seasoned royal at 25. Though the visit was cloaked in discretion, there was no mistaking its emotional weight. Louise knew the importance of this meeting, yet her father had made one thing clear: she was free to decline if she wished. It was her heart, not his politics, that would seal the match. To everyone's quiet relief, the pair found comfort in each other's company. Frederik, known for his calm demeanor, seemed to soften in Louise's presence. She, in turn, responded with warmth and curiosity. They shared conversations, strolled the castle gardens, and, despite their different worlds, discovered a mutual respect that hinted at something more. Just 2 months later, on the 15th of June in 1868, Louise and Frederik were officially engaged at Backaskog Castle. The engagement was met with celebration across 3 kingdoms. While many saw it as a diplomatic solution, few realized that a personal bond had already begun to bloom, one that would soon be tested by court traditions, public scrutiny, and the quiet struggles of a foreign bride. On the 28th of July in the year 1869, the bells of Stockholm rang out in celebration as Louise of Sweden married Crown Prince Frederik of Denmark in the royal chapel of Stockholm Palace. The ceremony, performed by the Archbishop of Uppsala, was not just a union of two young royals. It was a carefully choreographed display of reconciliation between two nations once divided by war and rivalry. The wedding was grand and full of symbolism. Louise wore Swedish finery, and her dowry was arranged entirely by her homeland. As the first Swedish princess to marry into the Danish royal house since the Middle Ages, she carried centuries of history with her down the aisle. Crowds gathered to witness this rare moment, a Swedish royal bride departing for Copenhagen, bearing hopes for unity and peace. In preparation for her new role, Louise had immersed herself in Danish language, literature, and culture. She studied under the Norwegian poet Lorentz Dietrichson, determined to adapt to the court she would soon enter. Her efforts were sincere, but her heart remained quietly anxious. Behind the ceremony's glow was the uncertainty of life in a foreign land, one where she would be expected to conform, charm, and never falter. When she arrived in Denmark that August, the welcome was warm, but the path ahead would not be easy. The marriage was celebrated as a triumph of Scandinavism, a dream of northern unity reborn through royal love. Yet for Louise, this triumph came with the quiet burden of isolation, scrutiny, and a family that would not always accept her. Crown Princess Louise entered the Danish court with quiet dignity, but she soon discovered that charm and preparation could not shield her from its frigid atmosphere. Though the public embraced her with warmth and admiration, the royal household proved far less welcoming. Her mother-in-law, Queen Louise of Denmark, ruled the court with rigid decorum and little affection for the Swedish-born princess. From the beginning, Louise felt like an outsider. Her straightforward nature and Swedish informality clashed with the more restrained Danish court traditions. Even her fashion choices, such as a Parisian evening gown, sparked criticism. Once, when Queen Louise disapproved of her hairstyle, Louise responded cheekily, "Take it easy, Pedersen." The joke did not land. Instead, it triggered a scandal so intense that the Queen sent Frederick and Louise out of the country for 3 months. Inside the palace walls, the silence was often louder than any spoken word. Her sisters-in-law offered no companionship, and even Frederick, shy and indecisive, failed to defend her when tensions rose. Only Princess Thyra, the youngest in the family, treated Louise with kindness and empathy. Despite the frosty environment, Louise endured with grace. She focused on her children, finding joy in motherhood and solace at Charlotenlund Palace, far from the critical eyes of court. There, amid the coastal breezes of Øresund, she created a warm family space untouched by court politics. But her loneliness remained, hidden behind official portraits and practiced smiles, a queen in waiting who lived for duty, but longed for acceptance. Behind the gilded facades of Copenhagen's palaces, Louise's marriage to Crown Prince Frederick grew increasingly complex. Though the couple had begun with affection and mutual respect, their bond weakened over the years. Frederick's timid personality left Louise isolated during times of conflict, particularly when his mother and sisters criticized or excluded her. But more painful still were his personal indiscretions. Rumors of Frederick's affairs circulated through the court, and though they were rarely discussed openly, they left deep scars on Louise's quiet dignity. In 1879, after years of enduring emotional distance, Louise traveled to Stockholm to visit her aunt, Queen Sophia of Sweden. There, distraught and weary, she sought spiritual counsel. Queen Sophia introduced her to Lord Radstock and Gustav Emanuel Beskow, figures of religious influence who offered her something she had long lacked in Denmark, comfort without judgment. From this point forward, Louise's faith became the anchor of her private world. She began reading the Bible deeply, learned Greek to study its original texts, and took up crafts such as leatherwork and painting as quiet, therapeutic pursuits. She also developed a lifelong friendship with Wanda Oxholm, a Danish lady-in-waiting with whom she shared both intellectual and spiritual reflections. At home, Louise became a strict but loving mother. Her children's lives were shaped by her devotion to discipline, faith, and quiet strength. Though her marriage never healed completely, she created an inner world of meaning and stability, one built not on royal favor but on belief, duty, and endurance. In a court that rarely offered affection, Louise found refuge in something deeper than titles, the solace of faith and motherhood. Louise's legacy was shaped not only by her position, but by her remarkable children, two of whom would ascend to European thrones. As crown princess, she gave birth to 8 children between the years 1870 and 1890. Among them were Prince Christian, who would become King Christian X of Denmark, and Prince Karl, later elected as King Haakon VII of Norway after its independence from Sweden in 1905. Though her influence at court was limited, Louise's role as a mother was commanding. She instilled in her children a strong sense of responsibility, personal piety, and public duty. Their education was structured, their upbringing laced with religion and restraint. Despite her own struggles within the Danish royal family, she prepared her sons to navigate royal life with resilience and quiet strength. Her daughter, Princess Ingeborg, also secured a powerful match, marrying Prince Karl of Sweden, bringing Louise's long-held dream of reconnecting her bloodline with her native land full circle. Through this union, Louise became the grandmother of 3 European queens, Queen Astrid of Belgium, Crown Princess Martha of Norway, and Princess Margaretha of Denmark. Though her marriage remained distant and her court presence subdued, Louise shaped the future of Europe not through politics, but through her children. With calm perseverance, she ensured that her values, duty, dignity, and moral strength would be carried forward by the next generation of monarchs, even if her own name faded quietly into the background. Away from the tensions of court and the struggles of marriage, Louise built a lasting legacy through compassion. As Crown Princess of Denmark, she dedicated herself to charitable work with quiet fervor, creating institutions and social support networks that would endure long after her reign. For Louise, philanthropy was not ceremonial, it was deeply personal. She founded multiple organizations aimed at improving the lives of women and children, including the Home Bethania and the institution Crown Princess Louise's Asylum. These projects provided shelter, education, and care to those in need, especially unmarried mothers and poor families often ignored by high society. Her involvement was hands-on. She did not merely lend her name to a cause, but took an active role in planning and oversight. Louise also became a supporter of the Church Association for the Inner Mission in Denmark, aligning her spiritual devotion with practical service. Through this and other efforts, she gained a reputation for being both compassionate and efficient, someone who could balance empathy with organizational skill. Despite her cold treatment by the court, her public image grew stronger with time. Danes respected her sincerity, and many saw her as a figure of dignity and humility. She brought a maternal presence to the royal house, grounded not in grandeur but in service. In an era where queens were often admired for their elegance or spectacle, Louise earned admiration through empathy, faith, and her steadfast commitment to the well-being of others. In the year 1906, following the death of King Christian IX, Louise's husband ascended the throne as King Frederick VIII, making Louise the Queen of Denmark. After nearly 4 decades as crown princess, she stepped into her final royal role with quiet composure. But despite her new title, Louise had no desire for grandeur. Her years of service, sorrow, and solitude had shaped her into a queen more concerned with people than with pomp. Louise remained focused on her charitable initiatives, continuing to support homes for the poor and devoting time to religious and cultural organizations. She avoided court ceremonies whenever possible and left public appearances largely to her children and husband. Her presence was reserved but dignified, less a sovereign on display and more a matriarch watching over her family and causes from the shadows. Though her tenure as queen was brief, lasting only 6 years, it coincided with a period of significant change in Scandinavia. Just a year prior, in 1905, Norway had separated from Sweden, an event that caused Louise personal heartache. Her son Karl, renamed Håkon VII, became king of the newly independent Norway, a position that echoed the dream her father once held for her. Louise's time as queen did not transform her, but rather confirmed what she had always been, a figure of strength through subtlety, and a symbol of quiet resilience in a world that often valued spectacle over substance. Louise's reign as queen ended with sudden sorrow. In the spring of 1912, King Frederick VIII died unexpectedly during a trip to Hamburg. The news sent ripples through the Danish court, but Louise, by then a seasoned figure of emotional restraint, responded with quiet strength. She was now Queen Dowager, the last widow of a reigning Danish monarch to retain the title officially. After her husband's death, Louise withdrew further from public life. In the years that followed, she commissioned the construction of Exiled House, a serene estate nestled between Hillerød and Fredensborg. Built between 1915 and 1917, it became her sanctuary. There, surrounded by gardens and books, she spent her final years in peaceful solitude, far removed from courtly politics and ceremonial pressures. But even in her quiet retreat, Louise maintained subtle influence. She received occasional visitors, stayed informed on royal affairs, and kept correspondence with her children and grandchildren, many of whom now ruled or married into Europe's most prominent dynasties. Though never outspoken, her presence remained a symbol of dignity and memory for the Danish royal house. Louise died at Amalienborg Palace in Copenhagen on the 20th of March in 1926. She was 74 years old. Her funeral was conducted with reverence, and she was laid to rest beside her husband in Roskilde Cathedral. In life, she was often overlooked. In death, she was remembered not for grand declarations, but for enduring a royal life with patience, service, and a deeply private kind of strength. In her final years at Exiled House, Queen Louise lived a life of calm reflection. The grand titles that once defined her, Crown Princess, Queen Consort, Queen Dowager, had long faded into the background. What remained was a woman who had weathered decades of royal expectation, emotional isolation, and quiet sacrifice. Surrounded by nature and memories, Louise continued to read, write letters, and practice her beloved crafts. Though she rarely appeared in public, the Danish people continued to respect her for her charitable past and dignified reserve. Visitors to Exiled described the home as peaceful and orderly, much like the woman who built it. Occasionally, she welcomed her children and grandchildren, especially those rising to prominence across Europe. Through these family ties, Louise witnessed the legacy of her motherhood stretching across borders, from Denmark and Norway to Belgium and beyond. By the early 1920s, her health had begun to decline. Yet even then, she maintained her routines and faith with grace. She returned to Amalienborg Palace in Copenhagen during her final months, where she quietly passed away on the 20th of March in 1926. Her death marked the end of a generation, a royal figure born into the romantic courts of the mid-19th century who had lived to see the old monarchies wane in the modern world. Louise was buried beside King Frederick in Roskilde Cathedral, leaving behind a legacy not of headlines or grandeur, but of endurance, faith, and a mother's unseen influence on the shape of Europe. Queen Louise's true legacy was never found in public speeches or political power. It lived through her children and the quiet restoration of bonds across Scandinavia. Her two eldest sons, Christian X of Denmark and Håkon VII of Norway, ruled with very different styles, but both carried their mother's enduring sense of discipline and restraint. In times of war and independence, they became anchors of stability, Christian during the German occupation of Denmark, and Håkon as a symbol of Norwegian sovereignty. But Louise's influence extended beyond thrones. Her daughter Princess Ingeborg's marriage to Prince Carl of Sweden rekindled a familial connection once broken by politics and war. Through that union, Louise became the grandmother of three future queens, Astrid of Belgium, Martha of Norway, and Margaretha of Denmark. In their grace and strength, echoes of Louise's poise could still be seen, silent, but lasting. Her life had begun in a fractured Scandinavia where national pride divided neighboring royal houses. But by the time of her death, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were linked not by treaties, but by blood. In an age where monarchies often faded, Louise had built bridges not with armies or politics, but through marriage, motherhood, and quiet perseverance. In history books, she may appear only briefly, an understated queen in the shadow of louder figures. Yet Louise's legacy endured through dynasties, shaping Europe's royal future not with force, but with constancy. She was the steady hand behind a generation of rulers who guided their nations through the chaos of the 20th century with calm, inherited strength. Though Louise never sought recognition, the world quietly honored her in ways she might never have imagined. During her lifetime, she received prestigious accolades from multiple monarchies, decorated as a Dame of the Order of Queen Maria Luisa in Spain, a Grand Cross of the Order of St. Catherine from Russia, and a recipient of the Danish Order of the Elephant, among others. These awards reflected not just her royal status, but a global acknowledgement of her quiet service. Beyond titles, Louise's name lived on in the landscapes of history. Queen Louise Land in northeast Greenland was named in her honor, a remote and icy expanse that, fittingly, mirrored her own quiet strength and enduring presence. Even in distant geography, her legacy was etched into the map. But perhaps the most profound tribute was the lasting impact she left on the European royal web. Through her children and grandchildren, Louise became a matriarch of monarchs. Her values passed down through dynasties that endured revolutions, wars, and fading empires. Her influence echoed not through force, but through generations shaped by her quiet dignity. Louise's life was never one of dazzling court triumphs or political headlines. Instead, it was a story of perseverance, quiet defiance, and grace under pressure. Her memory lives on not in statues or fanfare, but in the enduring respect she earned from a world that came to understand the strength hidden within silence. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Eugenie de Montijo was born on the 5th of May in the year 1826 in Granada, in the southern kingdom of Spain. How did this elegant young girl, born under Spanish skies, become Empress of the French Second Empire? What ambition carried her from a childhood shaped by loss into the most powerful palace in Europe? And what personal sacrifices would define the woman behind the crown, long after the empire itself had fallen? Eugenie's story began in a world already shaped by exile and memory. Her father, Count Cipriano de Montijo, had fought in the Napoleonic Wars and held deep admiration for France's imperial legacy. Her mother, Manuela Kirkpatrick, was a Spanish noblewoman of Scottish and Belgian descent, ambitious, cultured, and determined to see her daughters rise in society. Eugenie, the younger of two sisters, inherited both her mother's fiery determination and her father's romantic vision of greatness. When Eugenie was just 6 years old, her father died, leaving the family in a state of emotional and financial vulnerability. Manuela moved her daughters to Paris, where she worked tirelessly to secure their education and future. Though Eugenie was technically a Spanish noblewoman, her formative years were steeped in French culture, Parisian sophistication, and the echoes of fallen empires. From an early age, she sensed that she was destined not for quiet nobility, but for something far more luminous and dangerous, life at the heart of imperial power. Eugenie's early years were divided between the fading grandeur of Spanish aristocracy and the vibrant ambitions of Parisian society. In Granada, she was raised with tales of honor, bravery, and family lineage. Her father's military past and her mother's noble connections formed the backdrop of her identity. But it was the loss of her father in 1832 that changed the course of her upbringing. After his death, Manuela Kirkpatrick focused all her energy on her daughters, Eugenie and her elder sister Paca. Seeing the growing influence of France and the decline of Spanish royal power, Manuela moved the family to Paris. There, she reinvented herself as a hostess in diplomatic and cultural circles, introducing her daughters to writers, artists, and nobles who could shape their futures. Eugenie, still a child, found herself absorbing languages, ideas, and the sharp contrasts between the two cultures she belonged to. Educated at the convent of the Sacred Heart in Paris, and later in various schools across France and Spain, Eugenie grew into a young woman of curiosity and ambition. She was fascinated by history, drawn to politics, and enchanted by stories of Napoleon I. While other girls dreamed of marriage, Eugenie dreamed of empire. She idolized the first Empress Josephine and envisioned herself not as a quiet noblewoman, but as a figure of public power and personal brilliance. By her teenage years, she had already developed the poise, wit, and intelligence that would later captivate Europe. But first, she would need to step beyond convent walls and into the salons of Paris, where her rise to prominence would truly begin. As Eugenie matured into her late teens, she emerged as one of the most striking young women in Paris. Tall, poised, with flaming red hair and intelligent green eyes, she was impossible to ignore. But beneath her beauty lay a determined mind and a sharp instinct for social positioning. She was not content with mere admiration, she sought influence, and she understood the power of presence. Her mother, ever the strategist, introduced her daughters to the influential salons of Paris, where politics, literature, and gossip intertwined. Eugenie quickly became a favorite guest. Fluent in multiple languages, well-read and charming, she dazzled diplomats, writers, and nobles alike. But unlike many young aristocrats, she was not easily swayed by superficial praise. She viewed society as a chessboard, and herself as a player determined to reach the top. By the mid-1840s, Eugenie was a known figure among Europe's elite. She developed friendships with literary icons such as Prosper Mérimée, who became her mentor and admirer. She also studied philosophy and religion, shaped by a deep, sometimes conflicting blend of Catholic faith and modern ambition. Offers of marriage came and went, but Eugenie remained unclaimed. She dismissed suitors who offered titles without depth, lands without power. What she desired was more than security. She wanted legacy. In an era where women were expected to charm quietly and marry well, Eugenie dared to imagine herself on a throne. Her dreams, once whispered between sisters in the drawing rooms of Granada, were now sharpened by experience and proximity. And soon, her destiny would change forever, at a fateful encounter with the man who would make her empress. Eugenie first met Prince Louis Napoleon Bonaparte in the glittering salons of Paris during the late 1840s. At the time, he was the ambitious nephew of Napoleon I, fresh from political exile and poised for power. Eugenie was instantly intrigued. Unlike the poets and noblemen who had courted her before, Louis Napoleon radiated a sense of destiny. He was not just seeking a title, he was reaching for an empire. The attraction between them was not immediate in the traditional sense. Louis Napoleon, known for his string of romantic affairs, expected Eugenie to be another conquest, but she surprised him. When he attempted flirtation, she responded with cool wit. According to legend, she once replied, "The way to my bed is through the chapel." That statement, whether apocryphal or not, reflected Eugenie's deep Catholic convictions and her refusal to compromise her values for convenience. Over the next few years, their paths crossed repeatedly. As Louis Napoleon rose politically, becoming president of the French Second Republic in 1848, Eugenie maintained her independence, neither encouraging nor rejecting his interest outright. She was watching, calculating, waiting. Their connection deepened as he prepared to declare himself emperor. Eugenie saw in him the echo of the empire she had always idolized. For his part, Louis Napoleon admired her strength, intelligence, and refusal to be seduced by charm alone. She was unlike any woman he had met, steadfast in faith, confident in public, and fully aware of her own worth. When he finally proposed, it was not just an act of romance. It was a decision that shocked the French court and changed the course of Eugenie's life forever. When Louis Napoleon, newly crowned as Emperor Napoleon III, announced his intention to marry Eugenie de Montijo, the reaction across Europe was swift and divided. The French court was stunned. Political advisors had urged him to choose a bride from one of Europe's royal houses, a woman whose lineage could strengthen alliances and lend prestige to the fledgling Second Empire. Eugenie, though noble, was considered a commoner by imperial standards. She had no crown, no dowry, and no international backing. But the emperor was unmoved. "I have preferred a woman whom I love and respect," he declared, to an unknown woman whose alliance might have advantages mixed with sacrifices. It was a bold choice, one driven by admiration, defiance, and perhaps a romantic belief in destiny. For Eugenie, the decision was no less daring. She knew that marriage to Napoleon III would elevate her to empress, but also place her under relentless scrutiny. The public responded with curiosity and skepticism. While some admired the love story, others doubted Eugenie's suitability. Catholic conservatives praised her faith and modesty. Liberals dismissed her as ambitious and out of place in a modernizing France. Yet Eugenie, ever composed, remained unshaken. She prepared herself with discipline and grace, fully aware that her new role would demand more than beauty and charm. On the 29th of January in 1853, Eugenie and Napoleon were married at the Tuileries Palace. It was a grand ceremony watched by the world, a coronation of love, ambition, and the beginning of an empire's most glittering chapter. Behind the tiara, however, stood a woman who knew her position would always be earned, not simply bestowed. As Empress of the French, Eugenie stepped into a world of breathtaking splendor and intense scrutiny. The court of the Second Empire, centered at the Tuileries Palace, and later at Campigny and Fontainebleau, revived the grandeur of the Napoleonic era with lavish balls, opulent fashion, and displays of imperial power. Eugenie, with her elegance and sharp intelligence, became the center of this glittering universe. She embraced her new role with poise and purpose. Fluent in multiple languages and familiar with both aristocratic tradition and modern ideas, she hosted foreign dignitaries, led public ceremonies, and shaped the image of the empire. While Napoleon III focused on infrastructure and international politics, Eugenie became the soul of the regime, representing imperial grace and stability. But beyond her ceremonial duties, she held real influence. Trusted by her husband, she occasionally served as regent in his absence, making key decisions during state crises or foreign conflicts. Her Catholic faith guided many of her stances, and she often championed conservative causes, including the protection of papal authority in Rome. She also advocated for social causes, supporting hospitals, women's education, and orphanages. However, her political interventions were sometimes criticized, especially when they touched on international affairs. Her beauty and charisma brought admiration, but also resentment from Republican opponents who viewed her as a symbol of aristocratic excess. Still, Eugenie remained undeterred. With grace and conviction, she carried the weight of empire on her shoulders, not just as a consort, but as a partner in power. For a time, she seemed to embody the very spirit of the Second Empire, bold, refined, and utterly certain of its destiny. During the height of the Second Empire, Eugenie de Montijo became more than an empress. She became a global symbol of style, sophistication, and imperial grace. Her fashion choices influenced women across Europe and America. She popularized the crinoline, championed luxurious fabrics, and often collaborated with her favorite designer, Charles Frederick Worth. Under her reign, the French court became a theater of elegance, and Paris solidified its position as the fashion capital of the world. But Eugenie's influence was not limited to gowns and jewels. She was a master of diplomacy through social form. The Campigny gatherings, carefully curated retreats blending art, music, science, and nobility, were more than entertainment. They were instruments of statecraft, designed to build alliances and enhance France's image abroad. As hostess, Eugenie was fluent, witty, and observant, winning allies where politics alone might have failed. Behind closed doors, her role grew even deeper. She advised Napoleon III on matters of education, church policy, and colonial expansion. Her conservative Catholic leanings made her a defender of traditional values, often placing her at odds with liberal ministers. Yet her counsel was rarely ignored. During key absences, such as the Italian campaign or foreign state visits, Eugenie served as regent, demonstrating a level of trust and responsibility uncommon for consorts of the time. To the outside world, she was a dazzling monarch. To those in power, she was a serious voice, capable of shaping imperial policy. Balancing diplomacy, elegance, and personal conviction, Eugenie walked a fine line between public adoration and political controversy. Never merely ornamental, always essential. Eugenie's deep Catholic faith shaped many of her ideals, and few events tested her beliefs more than France's ill-fated intervention in Mexico. In the early 1860s, Napoleon III, with quiet encouragement from Eugenie, supported a bold and ultimately disastrous plan to establish a Catholic monarchy in Mexico under Archduke Maximilian of Austria. For Eugenie, it was a dream rooted in faith and tradition, a chance to restore order, protect Catholic values, and extend France's influence abroad. Eugenie believed that Mexico, destabilized by internal conflict and liberal reforms, was ripe for a noble moral monarch who could bring peace and uphold religious authority. She saw Maximilian, a Habsburg prince, as the perfect figure, idealistic, cultured, and aligned with her conservative vision. More importantly, she viewed Empress Carlota, Maximilian's wife, as a kindred spirit, a strong Catholic woman ready to uplift a foreign nation through monarchy. But reality proved far crueler than ideals. The United States, fresh from civil war, opposed the European interference. Mexican resistance, led by President Benito Juárez, grew stronger. Despite initial victories, Maximilian's empire began to crumble. Eugenie's moral vision had underestimated political realities and the resolve of the Mexican people. When French troops withdrew under pressure, Maximilian was captured and executed in 1867. Empress Carlota suffered a mental collapse, and Eugenie was devastated. The Mexican expedition became a stain on Napoleon's reign and a moment of profound personal grief for Eugenie. What had begun as a mission of moral hope ended in tragedy and deepened her sense of guilt and spiritual burden. For the Empress, faith remained, but now it came with painful lessons about power, pride, and the unpredictable cost of conviction. The twilight of the Second French Empire arrived with startling speed. By 1870, France was drawn into war with Prussia, a conflict driven by miscalculation, nationalist fervor, and diplomatic failure. As tensions escalated, Napoleon III led his army to the front, leaving Eugenie to serve once again as regent in Paris. But this time, the empire's foundation was crumbling beneath her feet. The Franco-Prussian War proved catastrophic. French forces were swiftly outmaneuvered, and by September, Napoleon was captured at the Battle of Sedan. News of his defeat ignited outrage in Paris. Within days, the empire collapsed, and the Third Republic was proclaimed. Mobs gathered outside the Tuileries Palace, and revolution hung in the air. Eugenie, alone and politically abandoned, realized her life was in danger. Disguised in a dark cloak and accompanied by a trusted aide, she slipped out of the palace and escaped Paris by carriage. Her destination was England, a country she had once admired from afar, now to become her refuge. In exile, Eugenie found shelter with Queen Victoria, who received her with empathy and warmth. The two women, both widows in time, would forge a lasting friendship. But in those first days of flight, Eugenie was a monarch without a throne, a mother cut off from her son, and a woman facing a future far removed from the golden halls of empire. Her reign had ended not in ceremony, but in shadows and sorrow. In exile, Eugenie's greatest source of hope was her only child, Louis Napoleon, known affectionately as the Prince Imperial. Born in 1856 amid the heights of the Second Empire, he had been groomed from birth to continue the Napoleonic legacy. Even after the fall of the empire, many loyal Bonapartists still viewed him as the rightful heir. Eugenie poured her energy into his education, his discipline, and his protection, determined that he might one day reclaim the family's place in history. But destiny had other plans. Eager to prove himself and frustrated by the isolation of exile, the young prince sought military experience. Against Eugenie's deepest fears, he was granted permission to join British forces in South Africa during the Anglo-Zulu War. Though he was kept away from direct combat, his position was still precarious. On the 1st of June in 1879, disaster struck. During a reconnaissance mission near Ulundi, the Prince Imperial was ambushed by a group of Zulu warriors. His horse bolted, his weapon failed, and he was fatally speared. He was just 23 years old. The news devastated Eugenie. The empire was gone, and now so was her son. The last Bonaparte hope extinguished in a foreign land. She wore mourning black for the rest of her life. No palace, no crown, no honor could replace the loss. The pain of that day never left her. From that moment on, Eugenie was not merely an empress in exile. She was a mother in eternal grief. After the death of her son, Eugenie withdrew from public life and settled in Farnborough, a quiet town in southern England. There, she established a sanctuary for memory and mourning. She purchased Farnborough Hill, a Victorian estate that she transformed into a private home and mausoleum. In its chapel, she entombed her husband, Napoleon III, and later her beloved son Louis Napoleon. It became a sacred space where she could grieve in peace, surrounded by their presence. Though once a powerful empress, Eugenie now lived a life of silence and solitude. She received only a few trusted guests, maintained a small circle of staff, and immersed herself in daily rituals of prayer and remembrance. The splendor of her earlier life faded into photographs, letters, and relics. Farnborough became a place where time stood still, where the woman who once ruled France now lived with ghosts. Yet she did not descend into bitterness. Her faith, though tested, remained firm. She donated to local charities, supported religious institutions, and offered hospitality to other exiled royals. Queen Victoria, who had welcomed Eugenie years earlier, remained one of her closest confidantes. Their shared widowhood and mutual understanding deepened a friendship born in tragedy. For nearly 4 decades, Eugenie lived in quiet exile. No longer an empress in title or influence, she became a guardian of memory. In Farnborough's stillness, she kept alive the story of a dynasty and the love she had borne as wife, mother, and sovereign. It was a life emptied by loss, yet filled with quiet, enduring strength. Though Farnborough was her refuge, Eugenie did not remain cloistered from the world. In her later years, she became an unexpected witness to the dawn of modernity. She traveled extensively, quietly exploring regions once unimaginable for a former empress. From Egypt to South Africa, from Spain to the Mediterranean, she moved with discretion, often unrecognized, yet ever observant. These journeys were not acts of leisure, but of reflection. In Egypt, she gazed upon the Suez Canal, a symbol of imperial ambition that had begun during her husband's reign. In Zululand, she stood silently where her son had fallen, facing the echoes of history with unflinching courage. Her visits were deeply personal, each destination carrying memories of power, loss, or transformation. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Eugenie witnessed astounding change. She lived to see the invention of the telephone, the automobile, and the airplane. Once surrounded by horse-drawn carriages and candlelit halls, she now rode in motorcars and read telegrams from across the globe. She met new generations of monarchs, including Alfonso XIII of Spain, and even viewed moving pictures, marveling at how the world she once ruled had evolved. Despite her age and grief, Eugenie adapted with grace. Her mind remained sharp, her dignity intact. She no longer sought a stage, but she never faded entirely into history. In a world that had outlived her empire, Eugenie moved through time not as a relic, but as a quiet survivor of an era long past. In the calm of her final decades, Eugenie often turned inward, reflecting on a life that had encompassed extraordinary triumph and devastating loss. She rarely spoke publicly about her time as empress, but in letters and quiet conversations with close friends, she offered glimpses into her thoughts. She believed her empire, though brief, had sought stability and grandeur in a time of turbulence. She defended Napoleon III's vision even as she acknowledged its flaws. Religion remained her anchor. Despite the heartbreak of exile and the loss of her husband and son, Eugenie's Catholic faith deepened with time. She found comfort in ritual and prayer, and she continued to support religious orders and charities well into her old age. Her belief in divine providence helped her reconcile with the painful chapters of her past. She did not see herself as a victim, but as a soul tested by fate. Visitors to Farnborough often remarked on her composure, her quiet intelligence, and her warmth. She rarely indulged in nostalgia, but she never rejected her imperial past. To some, she was a tragic widow of empire, to others, a symbol of resilience. She valued loyalty, dignity, and the enduring weight of duty. Though she had once been draped in imperial finery, Eugenie aged with simplicity and grace. She left behind no political dynasty, no living heir to carry her name. Yet her legacy endured in art, in architecture, and in memory. She had touched history at its highest and lowest points and emerged with her character unbroken. In a world that had changed beyond recognition, Eugenie remained a quiet monument to faith, loyalty, and the bittersweet echoes of power. In the spring of 1920, at the age of 94, Eugenie de Montijo made one final journey to her native Spain. Her health had been declining slowly, yet her mind remained sharp. She chose to spend her last weeks in Madrid, surrounded by familiar language, landscapes, and distant memories of childhood. Though she had lived much of her life in France and England, it was Spain that had shaped her earliest identity. Staying at the Liria Palace, the residence of the Duke of Alba, Eugenie was cared for with great respect and affection. Spanish nobles and visiting diplomats came to pay their respects to the last surviving sovereign of the Second French Empire. Even in her final days, her presence carried the weight of history. On the 11th of July in 1920, Eugenie quietly passed away in her sleep. Her death marked the end of an extraordinary chapter, not just of a woman's life, but of a dynasty's presence on the world stage. She had outlived her husband by nearly 50 years and her son by more than 4 decades. Her body was returned to England and laid to rest beside Napoleon III and the Prince Imperial in the crypt of St. Michael's Abbey at Farnborough. The ceremony was simple, solemn, and private, reflecting the quiet dignity with which she had lived her later years. Eugenie's passing closed the last page of a vanished empire. The world she had once ruled was gone, but her memory, woven into history, architecture, and the hearts of those who remembered, endured. After Eugenie's death in 1920, the world quietly closed the chapter on the Second French Empire. Her passing did not make global headlines, but among monarchs, historians, and the few who remembered, it marked the end of a profound era. She was the last surviving Empress of France, the final living symbol of Napoleon III's vanished dream. With her went the last living thread that connected the glamour of imperial Paris to the twilight of monarchies in the 20th century. For decades, her image endured through paintings, letters, and scattered artifacts. In France, where she had once ruled, her name faded under the rise of republican ideals. Yet some remembered her kindness, her elegance, her sense of duty. In England, where she had lived out her widowhood, Eugenie became a quiet figure of reflection, respected for her endurance, her grief, and her refusal to vanish into bitterness. Her mausoleum in Farnborough remains a hidden monument to loss and legacy. Visitors still walk the hushed corridors where marble effigies of Eugenie, Napoleon III, and their son rest in eternal stillness. There, the air carries echoes of vanished courts, lost empires, and dreams that never quite became reality. Eugenie's name may not be spoken as often today, but her influence still ripples through history. Museums hold her gowns, her portraits inspire curiosity, and her letters reveal a mind full of resolve and restraint. For every silent room she walked through, she left behind the dignity of someone who once ruled, then endured. And yet, Eugenie's story lingers in the fabric of fashion, in the stones of French architecture, and in the memory of a woman who bore the crown with both pride and pain. Her life was not merely an imperial rise and fall. It was a long, winding journey through love, tragedy, conviction, and quiet survival. In the end, she was more than France's last empress. She was Europe's last imperial widow, alone, remembered, and quietly immortal. What do you think about Queen Louise of Sweden and Denmark? Was Louise a unifying royal figure, a daughter of Swedish legacy who brought calm, charity, and grace to the Danish throne during an era of great change? Or was she a solitary figure, shaped by personal sorrow, overlooked in the shadows of her powerful relatives, and remembered only in quiet commemorations? And what about Eugenie de Montijo? Was she a visionary empress, a woman of fashion and faith who stood beside an emperor, shaped foreign policy, and held her dignity through revolution and loss? Or a tragic imperial widow marked by exile, haunted by grief, and slowly erased from the pages of modern France? We would love to know how their stories touched you. Were these royal women the soft strength behind nations, or silent mourners of vanished empires? Did their courage live on in memory, or dissolve beneath the weight of history's forgetting? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales from the past, stories of courage, choice, and the quiet force behind history. Thank you so much for watching.